Hi, it's Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome to Fail Friday, the series in which I fix your baking fail, my baking fail, or I tell you how to avoid a fail. And today we're going to be talking all about airbrushing. Now, this may be useful to you if you are a beginner, but hopefully you can also find some tips even if you're an advanced decorator. So tip number one, we're going to go over the basics. So basically back to the beginning when you actually purchase your airbrush machine. Now, there is no airbrush machine that is better or worse in my opinion, and they all pretty much work the same way. You press the power button and there's generally a few different modes. I generally like to have mine on high when I'm covering large surface areas like this. They all work the same way as well. You put your coloring into that little pot at the top and then you press the trigger down and then you're able to distribute the color. So why are there so many different airbrush systems in the market and why is there such a price difference? Well, from what I've gleaned, it mainly has to do with how much color the actual airbrush can hold. Tip number two, and this was one of the main reasons that I actually purchased an airbrush in the first place. I really wanted to be able to use stencils. I used to do it with just my stencil genie or not even a stencil genie and just holding that stencil over top of the cookie, but I would always end up with an imperfect stencil. And then my friend gifted me this Silkscreen specifically made for cookies. Look at how well it fits in there with the stencil genie and notice how it becomes one piece. Now, if you don't know what a stencil genie is, basically it is a magnetic square frame that holds all the stencils in place. And you don't just have to buy stencil genie products or Cookie Countess products for that to fit in. It will fit with any stencil. Now, I'm really haphazardly spraying that because I really wanted to check how well this Silkscreen would protect against overspray. And I was super impressed with how clean this turned out. I can't believe I don't see any dots or anything around that chevron pattern. Now, I will make note that I could have had the coverage a little bit better on that, but that was not the fault of the tools I was using. I just didn't add enough. Now, I just wanted to do another test to see how well this Silkscreen really would perform, so I decided to do a little bit of airbrushing on only certain parts of the cookie. It's all about how the stencil actually fits onto the cookie. So if you don't have a Silkscreen, you can achieve this without overspray. It's just a little bit more difficult. Tip number three is to be creative. Don't think that you just have to do stenciling or just minor shading with your airbrush machine. You can do so many different things. Now, I do experiment here a little bit. I will say the experiment doesn't go exactly as planned, but what I'm doing here is I'm taking a little bit of vodka. I brought myself a brand new angled brush, super excited to use it, and then I sprayed on some airbrush, and then I brushed some vodka through that airbrush. Now, it does create nice leaves here. I am getting a really nice effect, but I have a harder time when I try to go back over the areas that have dried a little bit too quickly. So if you are going to try out this technique, then you do want to make sure that you do that fairly quickly after you put the airbrush on. Then I just decided to let my creativity flow. I started just using my airbrush colors with paints, but as you can see, as I'm doing this, I am getting a little bit of cratering going on because there's a lot of color going on here. So do not fret, I am going to show you how to fix that. All right, so we talked about how I get a weird texture here because there's so much color going on, there's so much vodka on there, so I am gonna fix that. Now, of course, we can't turn back time and actually fix the base texture, so I'm just going to use a little bit of royal icing and do a brushed pattern technique. That way, that weird texturing going on isn't gonna look so bizarre, it's gonna look like it was part of the cookie in the first place. Tip number 4, let's talk about shading. Now, shading is really going to add some definition to your cakes or cookies, and what I do whenever I'm shading is I need to have a little bit more precision. So I do turn down my machine to either a low or medium level so that I can have a little bit more precision with that. My general rule of thumb is either to kind of wiggle it back and forth on the ends of things like a flower, or I like to start from the center and work my way out. Tip number 5, and this might go without saying, but I used to think that just airbrushing the cookie with a stencil would be good enough, and sometimes it is. But when I really looked at the images of pictures and inspiration that I really liked, I noticed that they put a lot of detail on top of their cookies. So make sure to add in all of those little details as well. That's what's going to make your cookie really pop and look different. For all of the details today, I am using a piping consistency, and it's thick enough to actually pipe all of those flowers as well. Tip number 6. Now let's talk about the actual colorings that you should use inside of your machine. So I used to think that if you just added vodka to edible gel food coloring, you'd be good to go. But honestly, my machine would get so clogged. So I always go with a Mist. Make sure that whatever color you're using, it's for an actual airbrush, and I assure you, you will save yourself the headache. Tip number 7, cleaning and maintenance. And this is probably one of the most important tips when it comes to your airbrush machine. Now, every single time that you want to change colors or when you're done using your airbrush machine, it's so important that you run water through it and you run it all the way through until you know there's absolutely no other color coming out. If you don't do this every single time, you're going to get clogs because that color is going to dry inside of your machine. The other thing is, whenever you're airbrushing using the stencil, I find that you do need to rinse in between every so often. Now let's say that your airbrush machine is so far gone and it is so clogged that you can't get it out. You will need to take your airbrush apart. After you take everything apart super carefully and try to remember what order you took things off in so you can put it back together in that way, then take all of the parts, and I like to soak them in a bit of vodka, or you can also use airbrush cleaner, and this just helps everything to unclog. Now you don't want to leave this soaking in water because that could result in rusting. So I do like to use the vodka or the airbrush cleaner. Now, some final thoughts about an airbrush machine in general. If you're not going to use it a lot, I wouldn't really invest in this. It is kind of expensive, ranging anywhere from $100 to even $250. So you do want to make sure that if you are going to invest, you're going to use it often and you're dedicated to actually taking care of it. I've had a love-hate relationship with my airbrush machine, especially because I did try to put different things like luster dusts watered down into my machine, and then it caused clogging, and then I wasn't able to use it. But now that I know how to actually take care of it, I love my airbrush machine and I love the results. And if you want to know why there is a gap right there, then you'll have to watch my next tutorial. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. And be sure to submit your baking fail, and it can be fixed by next Friday.